Our guest today is actor, motivational speaker, and retired U.S. Army Colonel Greg Gadson. As you can imagine, with a multi-talented guest like Greg, we're going to cover a wide range of topics today and how they relate to personal empowerment and what is sure to be an interesting, informative, and absolutely inspirational edition of Next Steps Forward. Colonel Greg Gadson, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be here this afternoon.
Greg Gadson is a 1989 graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and served on active duty for more than 20 years. He was a field artillery officer and served on active duty for Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm, Operation Joint Forge, Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, and Operation Iraqi Freedom. He's a former commander of the Army's Fort Belvoir garrison, and he's also a bilateral above-the-knee amputee as a result of a 2007 improvised explosive device attack in Baghdad. Colonel, let's dive right into things.
Yes, sir.
As you know, Next Steps Forward is focused on personal empowerment and helping listeners and others take their next steps forward. And that's why I think you're such a perfect guest this week. So much of your life has been about personal empowerment, not just once or twice, but numerous times as you've decided to, or had to, adapt to different circumstances. Going back to your early years, how have you been able to motivate yourself to take charge of situations in your life instead of letting them take charge of you?
Well, thanks for the great question. So, like many of us, our lives are really, they begin with our parents, begin with our younger, our formative years growing up, and I'm certainly no different there. Having two parents that were born in the 40s and grew up in the Jim Crow South, they were able to ground me and to really kind of pass on lessons of perseverance and just learning how to fight through difficult situations. They're both college graduates of Howard University and raised a family, and so they are fundamentally my first examples of really perseverance and really kind of appreciating circumstances that they had nothing to do with but had to endure.
What prompted you to decide you wanted to get into West Point? And then how did you go about making that happen?
Well, I wish I could say it was a grand plan, but I kind of wanted to pave my path, my own path, and I was a good student. I probably didn't show, it on most days, but I wanted my path and my vision was to be a professional football player. And in order to do that, I was going to earn a Division I college scholarship and play football in college and then get to the NFL. I was an all-state football player in Virginia, captain of my all-star team, captain of my high school football team. I was a wrestler. And so, best laid plans didn't work out for me. The scholarship offers that I had dreamed of were not there. And actually the only Division I opportunity that I was offered was to play at West Point. So, plan B, I honestly went to West Point, not knowing a whole lot about it, but with a chip on my shoulder to prove that I could play football at the highest level. And that was, that's what started my journey on the military, really.
Well, that's not a terrible plan B to have. And we'll talk about football a little bit later in the conversation.
Right.
The Navy used to have the slogan, join the Navy, see the world. But your Army assignments took you all around the United States and all around the world. As we mentioned, some very dangerous places like Iraq, Afghanistan, Bosnia-Herzegovina. Was that experience of a broader worldview something you were hoping for or expecting when you joined, or were you looking for something else?
I would say that accurately describes kind of what I was kind of looking for. Now, I say expecting. What was ironic was, I went to West Point in the middle of the 80s. And so that was, really the height of the Cold War. And I was commissioned into a Cold War Army. And many of my classmates, the vast majority of them were heading to Europe and sort of, viewing our adversaries, being the former Soviet Union. And I had kind of a contrarian look. I really thought that that our future wars and conflicts would revolve around the Middle East. And so I was a Middle East history major. I took two years of Arabic at West Point, and I chose an assignment that if something happened in the Middle East, then there was a good chance that I might be deployed there. And lo and behold, it played out exactly that way. I was actually out at the National Training Center in the Mojave Desert when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and so my battalion was pulled out of our training early. And by early October 1990, I was in Saudi Arabia.
How does the Army experience typically change a young man or young woman? And what are the similarities and differences for someone who enters the military as an enlisted personnel and someone who enters as an officer, as you did?
Well, so I guess I can really answer it both ways. Because of my uncertainty of my academic profile, I actually went to the Army's prep school, West Point's prep school. And so I was enlisted for a year, where I was stationed at Fort Monmouth, where I was really academic and board scores focused, math and English to set myself up for getting through the academy. So probably not the typical enlistment experience, but I did, I got in process and went through drill sergeants taking us through. And so, and I think that perspective of being enlisted really informed me as a soldier. And so, I say officers enlisted, we're all soldiers, and we have our roles that form the basis of our Army, and it's worked effectively for nearly 250 years. And so I like to say that I could always identify, empathize, sympathize with the challenges of our enlisted soldiers, what we've asked them to do. And I've always felt that I've got to be able to do and know and be able to empathize for everything that I've asked my soldier to do as an officer. So,
along those lines, what sort of young person would you encourage to enter the military, either as an enlisted or an officer? And I guess the flip side of that question would be, who would you discourage from entering the military?
Well, first of all, I realized that it would be impossible, just because of the size of our force, for every young man or woman to join the military. And so I guess I approach the answer to this question in terms of service, and being able to serve in uniform or the Peace Corps, or whatever it is, you essentially have a window in your life where that's really an option. Some of the services obviously have a limit to an upper limit to when you can join, and that that varies depending on the needs of the military. But it's about service. It's about being part of something greater than yourself. And so what I would say to young men and women is, if you have a burning desire, if you have a desire to be a part of something bigger than you, then you should really take a look at the service, because it offers you that opportunity. And then the other part I encourage them to think about is again, it's like your education. Once you serve, that's something you'll always have with you the rest of your life. And so it's a window. Almost every person I can imagine that's served is proud of their service. And so if it's a short time period in the span of our lives, it's sometimes 2 or 3 years seems like a lot of time, but it really is a drop in the bucket. And if you have any inkling to wanting to serve, I would encourage you to investigate and take a look at it.
That's a good paid promotion for you right there for military. Thank you. Yeah. I love it. So even as you came out of West Point as a commissioned officer, were there obstacles that you had to overcome? And I'm thinking in particular whether there was pervasive or subtle racism.
Um, uh, to say that the racism didn't exist or doesn't exist would be inaccurate. But one of the things I feel very proudly about, and really how our military, our nation's military, has been really kind of the leader of a lot of social change. I mean, we're the integration, and so I like to say that we have been proactive in integration of women, the integration of minorities, the integration of the LGBT community. Um, um, is the basis of our organization is that everybody is equal and that everybody deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. And so how can we expect someone to give their life in service to their nation if they're not seen in equal footing? And so it is fundamentally the basis of our military organizations. And so from that perspective, I was able to serve in various assignments of various kind of organizations and locations. I can say that there were times that I did run into some environments that were challenging, but as I said in the beginning, I'm very grateful that the lessons and the wisdom that my parents were able to impart, and the mentors that I had along the way that were enabling me to kind of hang in there and overcome.
People talk about having a bad day or a bad night. Let's put things in perspective by talking about a very bad night in your life. On the night of May 7th, 2007, while returning from memorial service for 2 soldiers from your brigade, a roadside bomb exploded in Baghdad. You lost both legs and your right arm was severely injured. What do you remember about that night, and what stands out most about your long, difficult recovery process?
Well, the first thing that stands out about that night was the memorial service that I attended before I was wounded. First Lieutenant Ryan Jones and Specialist Sunson had paid in full measure 3 or 4 days before I was wounded. And so Iraq was very violent in those early months of 2007. And it was almost like for many of us, we recognized the violence, and in a lot of ways, we weren't necessarily able to kind of process it at least on a very personal level. But that night, it was 2 soldiers, again, as you said, from my brigade. And so it really had kind of stuck in my gut. And so as I was heading back to my headquarters in a 4-vehicle patrol, my vehicle was hit. I knew what it was. It was actually my vehicle had been hit by an IED before, and so I knew what was happening. And I knew what was going on. I can remember kind of getting blown out of my vehicle and flying through the air and hitting the ground and coming to a rolling stop on my back. I was pissed off. I was just really fired up because I knew what had happened. And then from my perspective, I'm like, I'm here trying to make a difference in these people's lives, which I have very little connection with, and they're trying to kill me. And it's just kind of hard to kind of make sense of this. And then I knew that I was in bad shape, and I knew my life was in the balance. I just said, God, I don't want to die here. And I was out. But I was fortunate that my teammates, and I like this photo behind me. Those are my teammates. Those are the men and women that were in my battalion that I took to Iraq. First Sergeant Frederick Johnson He was the first to get to my vehicle when it finally came to a stop and recognized that I was missing. And he would locate me probably 100 or so meters from where my vehicle stopped, already unconscious. He started to resuscitate me, and a young 19-year-old private PFC would put the tourniquets on my legs. The fact that the doctors say saved my life. I would get evacuated and arrive back in the States on the 11th of May at Washington, D.C. at Walter Reed. I still had my legs, but I was intubated on a feeding tube, requiring surgery every other day to repair my blood vessels and clean up my wounds. Finally, after a week after arriving on the 18th of May, the blood vessels in my left leg could no longer sustain blood flow, started to bleed to death in the intensive care. The ICU nurse literally pulled off her belt and put a fuel expedient tourniquet on my leg. They took me in surgery and amputated my my left leg above the knee to save my life. The next day, the same thing happened to my right leg, but the doctors are one step ahead and actually pulled a vein from my left bicep and put in my right leg to save my right leg. Now, by this time, I was out of my induced coma, and I was able to communicate with the doctors. Ultimately, I would make the decision for the doctors to amputate my right leg. I just, honestly, Chris, I just wanted to get on with life. My right leg was never going to work as it was supposed to, and I was already missing my left leg. So on the 24th of May, the doctors amputated my right leg above the knee. When I came out of surgery, I got some more great news. So I'd been in the hospital 2 weeks by this time. They got to tell me that my right arm and elbow were broken, and it would require surgery to repair those. So it was just, one thing after another.
I called that a very bad night, and that's obviously a huge misunderstatement. How did that experience change you? Were there any positive things you've drawn from that night, or is it simply an event that happened and you've had to overcome and move ahead from it?
Well, the first thing that I will tell you is that I would say that I found out how strong my faith was. I mean, I really, if you asked me, on a scale of 1 to 10, how strong my faith was before this happened, I mean, honestly, I'd probably say 5 or 6, maybe 7 at the most. But I recognize that in my moment of that I could call on God, and I did. That was the last thing. I'm just going to hit the mute on this phone.
Not a problem.
I called on God, and so the first thing that I recognized that I was able to accept what had happened to me, and I knew that I accepted it because I wasn't angry. I wasn't like, why me, or just, and so I know that my faith, I know that God not only saved me, but he healed me. I was already immediately beginning to move forward with my life because I had accepted what had happened to me. And that acceptance, I tell you, anything that happens to us in our lives, if we can't accept it, then essentially it encumbers us. It's like dragging an invisible anchor around and that no one sees. Doesn't mean you can't succeed, doesn't mean you can't overcome, but it also means that you're still dragging it with you. And ultimately it sort of shackles you. And I was free from those shackles. I say that, it's a little tongue in cheek, but, I'm freer now without my legs than when I had my legs.
Did you plan to retire after 26 years of active duty, or did the IED change the course of your career?
Well, I had always planned to retire at 20. I wanted to finish my 20, command my unit, and transition for the military. My big goal was, if I could have done anything, was maybe to be a photojournalist, believe it or not. But after I got wounded, you know, it clearly changed my timeline. And I guess you know, in the back of my mind, it was sort of like, it was me kind of pushing back saying, look, I'm not letting you guys run me out of the military. I'm not giving you the satisfaction. I still have a heart of service. I still want to serve, and I'm going to make the Army throw me out, because I'm not going to just go with the flow.
I love that. Make them throw you out.
Yeah.
So I mentioned some of your duty stations, but you're also the director of the Army Wounded Warrior Program, also known as AW2 in Alexandria, Virginia. And for our listeners, that's not to be confused with the Wounded Warrior Project, which is a nonprofit organization. What does the Army Wounded Warrior Program do, and what are the eligibility requirements?
Right. So, you know, with with some of the challenges, the wars, two simultaneous long wars, counterinsurgencies, and men and women like me that were surviving injuries that, you know, in past wars we would have never survived. You know, quite frankly, at the time, our Veterans Administration was not prepared to be dealing with the rate and the complexity of the casualties of the men and women coming back. And so the Army, like many of the services, stood up equivalents to the Army Wounded Warrior Program to deal with the severe complexities of our wounded, injured, and ill service members. And so that was that organization for the Army. And so once I was approved to stay on active duty, I remember before I got approved to stay on active duty, the Army came to me and said, you know, would you be willing to, you know, to serve in this position? And I was like, and I honestly first kind of pushed back on, you know, I don't want to. This is not about me. I'm not being defined by my injuries, and I don't want to do this job just because I was injured. But eventually, I guess I had an epiphany of really, you know, my voice and my empowerment, and what I could do, and who I could represent. And I went back and said, if that job offer still is there, I'd like to take it. And so I was approved in January of 2010 to stay on active duty. And in June of 2010, after I finished my War College Fellowship, I assumed the duties as the director of the Army Wounded Warrior Program. The program was designed to support our severely wounded, injured, and ill service members. So it wasn't just wounded. You could have had a medical illness or an injury that had a 30% or greater disability rating. And that was the criteria for being in the program.
You know, I imagine you had some heartbreaking experiences as director of AW2, but that you also saw the very best examples of the human spirit, especially, as I understand, when there are more than 20,000 severely wounded, ill, and injured soldiers and veterans currently enrolled in AW2. Were there lessons you learned even after overcome so much yourself already about perseverance?
Well, you know, it's, you know, a lot of times we talk about perseverance, we talk about resiliency, and I think on a lot of ways, I mean, hopefully no one ever has to endure anything like this to find out if they have it. But it's also not something that you pull out of your pocket. At least I don't think of it as that way. Like, you know, I don't go, I have to persevere. I have to be resilient. As I go back to my parents, it's really about how you live your life. And one of the things that my parents and my coaches in sports and my teachers, you know, the lesson that I've learned and that I guess I can consistently articulate now is about how you live your life. And for me, it's about first being present. It's not holding on to the past and not living a day that you won't have, but truly keeping yourself present. And if you can, and if you're able to do that, then you can be your best, living up to being your best. And that's all we can do. I can't live yesterday. I can't live a day that I may not have. Let me just be the best I can today. Let me be present. And that gives me peace, and that allows me to be peace. Um, you know, Coach Young, my college football coach, used to say, "You play the play you're in," and I'm very grateful for those lessons, because I think what that's instilled into me and built a character into me is just to be present, be my best, stay in the moment, and so in that tough time when I was faced with the uncertainty of what my future looked like and what my life would be like after my injuries, I didn't have a future. And so I reverted back to essentially just being present. I can only be where I'm at. And that is my enduring lesson. That's what I try to impart to the folks is I can only control where I'm at, the now, and myself, and not to give away my energy to all these other things that I can't control.
Colonel, we were talking about the roadside bomb that severely injured you and how it changed your life. In 2017, you were honored with the prestigious Henry Viscardi Achievement Award, which recognizes extraordinary leaders with disabilities. I was reading about Dr. Henry Viscardi Jr., for whom the award is named. Would you share a bit of his story and tell us about the award and your selection as a recipient?
Well, as you said, the award is it was a great honor to receive it and to be recognized in a community that I could have never imagined that I would ever be a part of, at least the way it happened and to the extent that I am. Mr. Viscardi recognized the dignity that all people deserve, and so is certainly a pioneer in the disabilities, in the world of those with disabilities. The irony for me in receiving this award, particularly as a veteran, because our veterans have played significant roles in advancing the recognition and the empowerment of those with disabilities in our communities. Because of the wars, we've come back disfigured, and the desire to live up to and pursue our dreams is, our countries had to confront those and accommodate us. And it's the consciousness of Mr. Viscardi, the vision that he and really the tenacity to hold our nation accountable, to hold people accountable for treating all people with dignity and respect, just as our Constitution says, is incredibly humbling, and it was truly an honor to be able to accept that award.
Last month, another West Point grad and retired Army Colonel, Irving Smith, who introduced the two of us, was a guest on Next Steps Forward. His career has been distinguished by his dedication to fighting institutional inequality, including serving as West Point's head of minority admissions. As I think about his service and yours, I also think about the sensitivity issue of race relations in general and the recent push to rename military installations named after prominent Confederate leaders. You served at Fort Bragg, which was named after Confederate General Braxton Bragg,
Yep.
and at Fort Belvoir, which takes its name from a plantation that had African-American slaves. Do you think that Fort Bragg and Fort Belvoir should be renamed?
I think I say, it's funny. Belvoir is a French word that means beautiful place as well, and so maybe I have a little bit of a different spin on Belvoir, but certainly Fort Bragg, I would have to say I agree. We need to look at replacing those. So look, I'm not about changing history, but from my perspective, and this is something I identified even as a cadet, the irony of West Point and buildings being named after Confederate generals. At commissioning and at every promotion, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And we have installations in places of federal United States honor recognition named after people that did not honor their oath. And I think that we've got to take a look at renaming those. And then on the flip side, of all of our military bases, you could argue that one of our greatest presidents, Ulysses S. Grant, we don't have an installation named after him, and he was a general as well. And so, so long answer to say, yeah, we really need to take a look at what we are. Who we're holding in honor and holding in esteem, and for every African American, for every person of minority that sees that name and what that name fought for, it just stands in stark irony for what we are fighting for, and so.
So maybe name Fort Bragg to Fort Grant.
That's a good start.
And we'll start there.
Yeah.
Another thing that Colonel Smith and I discussed was the importance of education. And I'm really struck by how similar your education path is to his. You're both West Point graduates. You hold 2 master's degrees, one in information systems from Webster University, and the other in policy management from Georgetown University. And as our listeners know, I'm a Syracuse Orange alum, and so if we have time, we'll talk about basketball, but we'll save that for later too.
Right.
Colonel Smith has you beat by 1 master's degree, but
right.
You're also a graduate of the Command and General Staff College and the Advanced Field Artillery Officers course in 2010. And while Colonel Smith has a degree from the Army War College, you're a War College Fellow at the Institute of War Politics in Washington, D.C. So you just might have the edge on Colonel Smith on that one.
All right.
Either way, both of you have very impressive academic credentials. I'll ask you what I asked him, and that is simply, why has it been so important to you to continue to keep learning and to accomplish so much academically?
Well, Irv is, I would consider Irv much more of an academic than myself. I actually find it, the academic environment has never been a favorite environment of mine. I think for me, it's really been a recognition of progress and what I need to better myself. And so it's not an endeavor that I looked for, but it's an endeavor that I recognized that I needed to remain competitive and to improve myself. The funny thing is, after I got my first master's degree, I said, I am never going back to college again. And so as I was recovering from my wounds, what I realized I was sort of in this awkward position where I needed something to do in my life, but I wasn't ready for the responsibility of going back to a military unit. And it was for this reason. I was like, I knew I wasn't ready for responsibility. I didn't want to fail and have others fail below me. And so I came to the conclusion that at least if I went to school, if I failed, then it was only impacting me. And so I asked the Army if I could kind of use school to work my way back into life to sort of figure things out. And so that was what kind of drove me to my second graduate degree. And I had deferred going to the War College. And so after I finished Georgetown, I definitely did not want to go to grad school 2 years in a row. And so I queried and asked them if I could find an alternative and that was my fellowship. So you give me way too much credit for being there, but but in hindsight, my education has opened up so many opportunities to me, and so formal education is really what the world tends to recognize, but but the thirst for knowledge, the thirst for improvement is really the lesson that I try to impart upon people is you never stop learning. And you can be in a traditional learning situation, but you can be a non-traditional learner. And there are plenty of examples of non-traditional learners that have been successful and achieved greatness in our society.
And what do you say to young people, or even for that matter, to older people who have been out of school for years or even decades, who believe that higher education is out of reach or just not worth the extra effort?
Well, first thing I could say is if I can do it, then anybody can do it. But I would say, it's a gateway to challenge yourself. Being in an academic environment is truly a challenge for myself, and so find ways to grow. I mean, we don't grow unless we challenge ourselves, and that's how I've learned to use education. I learn a lot from YouTube, believe it or not, because it poses a question, and it's proved to be an invaluable tool. So the bottom line is we're always learning, or you always want to learn. Knowledge is temporary, but learning is lifelong.
Let's shift gears now and talk about another of your careers that you learned. Let's talk about acting. How does a guy go from being a real life Army colonel to a lieutenant colonel on the big screen in the 2012 movie Battleship? And what was that experience like?
Well, certainly not one that I ever anticipated, ever dreamed of, ever desired of, and really it was the graces of Peter Berg, who found out about me through the national press and my involvement with the New York Giants and their success in the 2007-2008 football season. But I took it on, like learning to walk in prosthetics. I took it on as a personal challenge to be my best and do something that I'd never done before. But it was great working for Pete. He made me almost kind of think of him as a football coach, and so you take direction from a coach, and you took director from a director, and I think what allowed me to be able to do what I did was sort of a recognition of the journey, the arc of my character, but also the trust that I had in Pete and the folks around me to be able to really kind of access my emotions and allow myself to be vulnerable. So I know there are a lot of sayings. Acting, you really are in a way opening up yourself. When I first started, I was like this. I was the lieutenant colonel, but I eventually opened Greg and accessed, Greg Gadson to carry out my part.
Well, you then reprised that role as David Cole in 10 episodes of The Inspectors, which was a crime drama TV series that ran from 2015 to 2019 and centered on criminal investigations by U.S. Postal Inspectors. So again, how'd you go from a real life colonel to a movie lieutenant colonel to, I assume, a TV series Postal Inspector?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. Well, they didn't kill me, so they didn't kill me off. But it was the director and the casting folks that saw me in Battleship and thought that I played a role as a mentor to a young man who was recently paralyzed in a car accident, and so again, a little bit of transfers to what I'd been through, my service as the director of the Army Wounded Warrior Program, and really being able to empathize with with a character that was in that situation. So I got a chance to do that. And again, it was pretty neat. So it is truly, when it's often, I guess I'm not used to hearing my name as an actor. I mean, I've done it for sure, and I guess I'm a SAG member, but it's not the first adjective that comes out of my mouth when I think of myself.
Then maybe it's this one. You mentioned earlier in the show you're interested in photography, photojournalism.
Yep.
How did you get into that? What sparked your interest?
Well, I think I believe I'd say I picked up the hobby from my dad, who did it as a young man, and then it just kind of fell by the wayside, and it was, perhaps my interest in his equipment that captured me, and so I bought my first camera when I was 18 years old. I remember, collecting my graduation from high school money and buying my first camera, and a camera has been part of my life ever since. Many people like to write and journal. That's what my camera is to me. It's actually my, it's become a huge part of my life. I remember when I was recovering in the hospital, and after I'd come out of surgery from my the first surgery I did on my right arm, I had some complications from that, and I had ulnar nerve and radial nerve damage and heterotopic ossification, which caused my right arm to lock up, so I couldn't bend my right arm, and the radial nerve damage prevented me from picking up my right wrist. And I remember that was really the kind of straw emotionally and mentally that broke the camel's back for me. Wasn't losing my legs, but it was the realization that I might not be able to hold a camera again. That was just utterly devastating. And fortunately that didn't happen, but that was, again, that was the personal kind of challenge that I had that not many were aware of.
Well, your work has most recently been featured prominently in Coming Home, Journey Community Dialogue, a public art project based in New York City that seeks to encourage communication between civilians and those who have served in the U.S. military. What message were you hoping to convey, and what did that experience mean to you?
Well, Brookie Maxwell was the founder of the Coming Home project, and I actually met her with another West Point grad, Lieutenant General retired John Caldwell, who felt that I could connect with her and share some of the lessons of really all aspects of the arts, from dancing to singing and acting, to photography, artistry, and conveying the service of our service members and our families, and the sacrifice that we make in service to our country. I often have shared this fact that, less than 1% of our country serves in uniform. And when you contrast that to nearly 25% during the height of the World War II, where, 1 in 4 Americans was serving our country, or in uniform, or maybe not or directly in uniform or out of uniform, but everybody knew someone in the military, where that's not the case. And so I know that our country appreciates and respects and knows what we do, but they don't necessarily know who we are and what we sacrifice. And this project was an attempt through dialogue, through many different forms, to be able to kind of connect that and cause some intellectual curiosity in people at least wonder and explore that to a higher level.
Well, I said at the start of the podcast that you're a multifaceted, multi-talented guy. And we talked about playing football at West Point, but you didn't go pro. You know, somehow though, you have a Super Bowl ring. And again, you didn't play pro. Now, as a lifelong diehard Dallas Cowboys fan, it hurts me a bit to relive the 2007-2008 NFL season.
Right.
But how the heck did you manage to become a recipient of a specially minted Super Bowl 42 ring?
Well, thank you. Well, it's ironically a West Point classmate and football teammate, Mike Sullivan, was a coach for the New York Giants, was a wide receivers coach at the time. And like many of my teammates, he came by to visit me while I was recovering in the hospital. Ironically, that season, they had started out, the Giants had started out 0-2 and were coming to Washington, D.C. To play the Washington Redskins, who were 2-0. And Mike, kind of recalled our visit and asked me if I'd be willing to talk with the team, and I said sure. And at this point, realized I had never spoken publicly to anyone, and so he talked it over with Coach Coughlin, and Coach Coughlin would ask me to address the team the night before they played the Redskins. I remember that. I remember sitting on the sideline with the Redskins, and we went in the locker room at halftime, and the score was Redskins 14, Giants 3. And I remember kind of thinking to myself, that was heck of a motivational speech. But ironically, the Giants would rally and would win the game 24-17, and begin an 11-game road streak, which went through Dallas in a playoff game and culminated in the Giants winning the Super Bowl 42, where I was able to address the team the night before the game once more. And so the Giants were kind and generous to share their victory with me and awarded me a Super Bowl ring. Actually, I had two. I have one for the second time we beat the Patriots as well.
Now you're just rubbing it in. What do you want our audience to recognize and internalize about personal empowerment and their ability to conquer obstacles?
Well, I think, to me, I think the challenge is both simple and it's both tough. Having the self-awareness to really be in the present, to let go of the past, and to not live a day that we're in, to truly be present. And you have to be self-aware to understand when you're present and when you're not. And once we can kind of wrestle that, just live up to the challenge of being your best. That's all we can ever give to any one day, any one circumstance is that. And I believe that those, if we can do that, we can create those habits. Those habits ultimately become our character. And if that's and when they become our character, that's the way we live our life. And that to me is our challenge in life.
Live your best. That's been your theme throughout our conversation.
Yeah.
Colonel Greg Gadson, thanks so much for being with us today.
You bet, Chris. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for everything that you're doing to share these messages with people, and appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to Next Steps Forward. I'm Chris Meek. Be sure to tell your friends and family that we'll be back next Tuesday, same time, same place, with another leader from the world of business, politics, sports, or entertainment. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.